Welcome to the BOGART Effect, a wealthy wisdom podcast. The following BOGART Effect podcast is intended for general information purposes only. The information discussed is no substitute for personalized investment advice from BOGART or another investment professional. Please see important disclosure information at the end of the presentation. All right, good morning. Welcome to the BOGART Effect. Today I've got Mark Hurley, who's been a longtime friend. Mark's the owner of Digital Privacy and Protection. Mark, thanks for taking some time this morning.
It's great to be here, James.
So I know you professionally and personally. You guys have been working with my wife and I, but, the goal today is to really educate our clients on what cybersecurity risk is, give some examples, maybe educate on some things that a lot of people most likely aren't considering. I certainly know I wasn't aware until, unfortunately, I was aware, and we started getting targeted for cybersecurity breaches. And gosh, if they're not getting more and more creative by the day, and especially with the development of new technology, AI and quantum computing, it's getting even better and better and better. And so the need for organizations like yours, I think, are becoming just really underappreciated in terms of the value that's provided in understanding what cybersecurity risk is.
Well, thank you. You're absolutely right, too. How fast this is moving is breathtaking. Right now, cybercrime is bigger than the sale of illegal drugs. In other words, when you think of crime, you think of a lot of things, but very few people think of cyber. And it goes beyond just stealing money. I mean, you talk to the guys at the Bureau, what they're going to talk to you about, the risk that cyber creates for your family personally. Mm-hmm. Simple example. Most social media software that you have comes with location tracking software. People aren't aware of this. You can turn it off. But to do this, you got to go through a host of settings and work your way through all that. But if you don't, anybody can figure out where you're at any time. And a study came out recently that found that in 80% of the home burglaries, of the almost 900,000 burglaries every year in the United States, the burglars are going into the improperly protected social media accounts of their victims to figure out what houses to rob and when to rob them. Okay, so this is more than just money. It's enormous theft of money business, but it goes way beyond that if you're thinking about how to protect yourself when you're online.
Well, and to take that same example one step further, just because you have your settings set to private, we learned this one, right? You helped me with this one. But just because you have your settings to private doesn't mean that they can't see necessarily where you are or where the assets are that they might be wanting to target.
Understand that, one, these guys are really smart and sophisticated. And we have this enormous lag right now. When people ask me about, okay, how do I think about protecting myself online? I say the best way to think about this is driving a car. All right. Think about this. If you went out and got in a car without any instruction or training and tried to drive it, what would happen? You'd probably kill yourself and somebody else. You don't even know which side of the road to be on. It would be exciting to be generous. Now, the internet came along 35 years ago, and there really has been no training on how to safely use it. And like all new things, they say, oh, it's a whole new world, and none of the old rules apply, et cetera. And whenever criminals hear that, they start licking their chops. And what they have figured out is that there's this enormous business for tech companies that's involved in collecting your information, packaging it and selling it to advertisers. In fact, if you look at the economic model of most of these companies, that's really make most of their money. I mean, Meta, which is Facebook, Instagram, others, they made $60 billion last year selling customer information to advertisers. All right. Well, what's problematic about that is the cyber criminals have figured out how to get that information. So would you put a camera in your house and turn it on, let anybody see what's going on in your life? If you're not taking the steps, which is if you're going to put software on your device, you've got to figure out all the settings that come with that software. First thing you got to figure out is it's safe. Because one of the new types of attacks is the bad guys are creating phony applications. and they're putting them out there, and they look really interesting, and they have all kinds of spiel around them so people want to use them. But what you're doing is infecting a computer virus into your device by downloading it onto them. So one, you got to figure out what you're working with. But two, if you're going to have something like this, you got to go spend the time to understand all the settings involved. We talked about Meta. With Meta, there's about 80 settings you have to turn on to use it safely. LinkedIn, there's 119. Amazon, there's 37. I mean, Amazon makes more money collecting and selling your information than they do selling you product. That's really what their core business is. Warren Buffett talked about this once, how he didn't understand. They just thought it was a retailer. And then when he figured out the information side, he said, oh, this is a great business.
I should have probably started and said that it's going to be hard to sleep tonight after listening to the podcast with you.
All right. No, but getting back to the car example, and we have a class that we'll do later, and we can get into greater detail about this. But look, what you want to do to protect yourself is some really basic things. First thing, you got to get smarter.
Sure.
And if you're going to use a device, you got to figure out how to use it safely. There's a bunch of settings. You got to understand those settings, and you got to understand what you're doing with the device. A simple example of a common attack we're seeing is that people don't realize when they buy a device from the store, the default settings are designed to automatically collect and take out your information.
Yep.
Because that's their business. Well, a byproduct of that is in about 5 or 6 places, depending on the device, all your user IDs and passwords are being recorded.
Yep.
So let's say I'm a criminal. I can find a way to get in your device. Get a virus in there. You're at a bar or restaurant. You're not paying attention. I look over your shoulder, watch you put the passcode in. I distract you. I steal the device. Guess what? Everything's sitting there.
Or how about
you can prevent this?
How about you're on communal Wi-Fi?
Well, that's another one. I mean, if you're on communal Wi-Fi and you're not encrypting your online traffic, you do know everyone else on that network can watch what you're doing and copy all your passwords. And next time you go to Starbucks, or a hotel has free Wi-Fi, look around. There'll be somebody sitting there sipping coffee, working on a computer all day. Trust me, they're making a lot of money. You know why? They're collecting passwords, which they go sell. And for your device, if you haven't turned all the right settings on, someone gets in there. I'll give you a recent example we ran into. Visor on the West Coast had a client down in Chile on vacation. Guy pulled out his iPhone, put in the code to open it up. Guy on a motorcycle came up and grabbed it. Within 30 minutes, they cleaned his accounts out.
No.
We've never had a family get breached the entire time we run the business because if you do the basics, you're fine. But if you don't do the basics, it's just a matter of time till they get to you. And we have people show up every day who've lost lots of money looking for help. The other part of the basics is, as clever as you think you are in picking passwords, the bad guys are, trust me, faster and more clever than you are. So, for example, there was a study done using AI, thing called ChatGPT, done by a company that consults to a lot of the Fortune 500. And they found that using ChatGPT, they can now correctly guess any 8-digit alphanumeric password. We're talking uppercase, lowercase, numbers and symbols in less than 1 second. So as I say in my class, if you're using an 8-digit password, just use password. You're not going to stop the bad guys. And if you're using a simple password or reusing a password, it takes like 2 seconds. The only way to protect yourself is you got to use unique, randomly generated 20 to 25-digit alphanumeric passwords.
Which
otherwise, don't use passwords.
Yeah,
because they're going to find them. They're going to get through. In fact, there was a brief announcement 4 or 5 months ago. Google, Apple, and Facebook. They kind of did it on the sly, but it's in a bunch of the trade rags. They announced that they were going to that some of their vendors had been breached. And remember, these companies, if you haven't turned the settings on, are regularly collecting all your passwords and user IDs. And it turns out now there are 19 billion user IDs and passwords sitting in a unified data set online.
Oh, yeah.
So if your if your listeners take anything away from this podcast, you haven't changed your passwords in a while, you probably want to do that.
I ended up, and so my story is we had a cyber issue, and that's what led to us having our conversation, in addition to knowing each other professionally. But I had a company do an analysis of my wife and I, and there were over 180 instances where my wife's passwords were publicly identifiable and out there.
This thing is not unique. We find this all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it just people are still operating like it's 1990 and it's 2026. they gotta get up to speed.
So I guess, coming back a little bit to frame this, like, who are the cyber criminals and what is it that they're coming for? I mean, we talked about the information, but I mean, I'm assuming it's money, leverage. What?
Yeah. Well, there's thousands of them, obviously. What may surprise a lot of people is that many of the same people who by day are working for hostile governments to the United States, attacking, trying to hack into the CIA, Department of Defense, places like that, and many of them have succeeded. By night, they moonlight and they start criminal gangs. They got to steal money. And these guys are allowed to openly operate in these countries, and they're mind-numbingly sophisticated. Also, less well-known is there's thousands upon thousands of very small but really sophisticated cyber gangs. These guys are some of the best and earliest users of artificial intelligence software. They fully automated their attacks. I mean, they're hitting thousands of people at once all the time. And these guys are out to steal money. That's sort of one group. We want to think about who one group of bad guys are. The group the FBI will talk to you about, because yes, they're worried about that group. What they're really worried about is a combination of the burglars who I talked about and predators. Now, if you're not taking steps to manage what information you're putting out there, and when I say manage it, even if you have, say, a social media account and you don't use it, you're exporting tons of information about you because the default settings on the app grabs everything else you're doing and sends it out. So you haven't turned all those settings on. You're effectively just exporting tremendous amounts about you. And so what the FBI will talk to you about is there are predators that will go into parents' and grandparents' accounts, gather a bunch of information about kids, profile them, and then connect with them online in these chat rooms anonymously. And because they know so much about the kid thinks they've met their soulmate. And over time, they get the kid to trust them. And boy, I don't have to use a lot of imagination there to tell you how dangerous that gets. This is what the Bureau is really focused on. It's gotten so bad, they have a separate unit just dealing with teenagers being stalked online.
Well, and related to the social media also, one of the things you guys taught me was a lot of this is a family-oriented approach, right? It's not just one person who has to be vigilant and adapting to these types of educational initiatives and protective measures. But like, as you just mentioned, the kids, but also grandparents, right? Like my mother-in-law posting a picture that we're all on vacation together. And let's just say somebody was targeting my wife and I. Well, now they know that no one's in our house.
That's really happened. And that happens all the time.
Yeah.
Happened to a friend of mine's neighbor. Again, you have to sort of think about this. Now, let's be clear. We communicate today through all this technology. We can't go back to living in caves. So the issue isn't whether you use these apps and all that kind of stuff. The issue is whether you use them safely.
Correct.
Now, if you had put on all the privacy settings on your apps, you can post anything you want because the only people who are going to see that are people that you've picked.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you haven't done that, you're broadcasting it to the whole world. I mean, we had this insane trend, if you remember, about 15 years ago. Everybody's trying to get likes. I want the most likes. No, you don't.
I would argue there's a whole generation that still wants that. But
yeah, we do have a emotionally stunted group of people that haven't figured out you don't want everybody in the world looking at what you're doing. That's right.
Well, but I think to my point, right? Like let's just say, for example, and I don't want to pick on my mother-in-law, but if she didn't have the privacy settings on, and someone were trying to target my wife or I, the vulnerability breach is with her, and same goes with nannies and childcare and like all the things like they're going to come at you more than just you. They're going to look at for vulnerability points that are more than just you. Which, I mean, again, this is the stuff that starts to keep you up at night.
Yeah, well, the good news is that if you do take the simple steps, there's a lot of them. I mean, anybody could do it. It just takes you a very long time. But if you do that, you become what's called a hardened target. And candidly, we worked with families for 4 years, never had a family get breached and lose money, touch wood. It'll happen at some point, but someone will do something foolish enough. But they quickly go on to somebody else. 99% of the world doesn't do the basics. If you do the basics, you're really unattractive. It requires too many resources to get to what they want. versus, what they could actually steal from you. And as I mentioned, a lot of these attacks are fully automated. So if you've put in a bunch of protections, but let me emphasize something. Everybody gets breached. Okay, everybody gets breached. The CIA, Department of Defense, everybody gets breached. What cybersecurity is about is not eliminating all breaches. You want to minimize them. But on top of that, you're putting in extra protections. So just in case you are breached, they still can't get to what they want. And that's the key to cybersecurity.
And I think I want to emphasize the point that you just made, though, is the harder you make it to breach, there's so many other soft targets that it's kind of like they're going to go after the easier targets because you've put these walls and barriers up around you. And I like your comment about everyone's going to get breached because I think that that's extremely accurate. And some of it's outside of our own control, right? Like the retail vendors get breached all the time, right? Like, and now our data's out, right?
That's right.
Like, and that's a breach.
We had a family. We've had several families that work with us getting breached. They just never lost money. And so we get these calls. They're noticing something funky going on. It was actually typically triggered through something a friend did. And so we'll get in there real quickly and find out what it was and get rid of it. And the good news is I get to tell the family, you are driving the criminals crazy. Because normally when they breach someone like you, they can steal everything. Here they can't steal anything. It's driving them nuts. Because you have the extra protections.
That leads to probably my main question for today is, how do people who have wealth protect themselves, right? I mean, and it's really, when you think about, like, we could talk about all these things that can create risk for us, but, really the fundamental point is like, how do you protect your money?
Yeah, well, let's understand first where you're at risk. And this, as I said, families show up on our doorstep looking for help every day. We just had a family got in the Schwab account. They got into their Citibank account. It was not good. And so we're helping cauterize the bleeding. And now they're going to become clients they weren't before. But they aren't getting the money back. You have to understand that all the financial institutions you work with spend billions of dollars in cybersecurity. But in spite of that, they lose billions of dollars every year. And they've kind of reached the point where they said, look, if people are not going to act responsibly, we're not going to take the risk. So if you actually closely read your bank or custodial agreement, they've designed those things so that if money is stolen and you're even only indirectly at fault, they don't have to reimburse you. Okay? So this is everyone starts to think, well, I got money in a bank. It's got federal deposit insurance. No. Federal deposit insurance is there in case the bank fails. Someone gets into your account because of something you did or should have done. We had a family show up, lost $400,000 out of a Bank of America account. They weren't clients then. They are now. The guy, a very prominent medical researcher, was at a conference, accessed his bank account. It was a Bank of America account, accessed it with his cell phone. It was on public Wi-Fi. As we talked about, anybody can see what you're doing. They copied the password, sold it offshore, which is typical, to a Nigerian gang. They got in there, stole $400,000, went to Bank of America, and Bank of America said, not our problem. Read your agreement. Had this happen to the family in the Northeast with out of a Citibank account, lost $360,000. Not Citibank, Chase. But in fact, look, these organizations, they're spending a fortune. They just reasonably are saying, if you're not going to do your part, why should we?
Well, but to
take the risk?
Reframe that, right? Like, and I'm going to put myself in their shoes, right? Like, both of those were examples where the client essentially gave the bad actors their passwords. And more or less, it's not unknowingly, right? But like, that's no different than you handing someone the key to your house and saying, just come on in and take what you want.
Right. That's exactly right.
And so, the intentionality around protecting yourself, I think, is imperative.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you're online, if you read any online agreement to do, transact with commercially, Amazon agreement, eBay, and that kind of stuff. No one ever reads these things. But what you have to understand is if you're online, you're doing anything financial, anything commercial, you have agreed in writing to take 100% of the risk, and there is no recourse. Okay? That's a starting point. Okay, now, as scary as it all sounds, what do you got to do to protect yourself? Well, number one, if you're going to have a device, you got to learn how to use it safely, which is you got to figure out all these settings on it. You need to engage them. Okay? Yep. And understand, as I talk about settings, none of these are static. these companies make so much money collecting and selling your information. About every 6 to 8 months, they change them. So about every 4 months, we have to come into our clients and update them.
Well, and and I learned this from you all just by allowing an update to happen on some of these apps. That update can change some of the settings that allows them to access data.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Apple, every time they do an iOS update, they change a bunch of the settings. Look, if you're making as much as they were collecting info, of course you'd do that. Secondly, as I mentioned, you have an online account, you got to be a grown-up. You got to use a unique, randomly generated 20 to 25 digit alphanumeric password. Otherwise, just publish your password. It's not going to take long for the bad guys to get in. The real heavy lift involved here is apps. People like to collect these things. Less should be more. You should use as few apps as possible. And any app you should do your homework to figure out what they are. Are they safe, and do you really need them? For example, crypto. We're seeing an enormous number of attacks where people have lost a lot of money, where they go to some sort of crypto site and they download the app and then they start trading in crypto and then they wire money. What they don't realize is the criminals have found a way in some of these places that aren't highly regulated to put fake apps in front of the real apps. And then you're actually downloading malware, computer virus onto your device, and then you wire the money. Okay, a family lose $460,000 showed up on our doorstep. This happened to. Okay, we saw something recently involving gold options. Someone was trading gold options. This happened to. All right. So what you have to do is you have to understand that you use as few apps as possible. You do your homework on them. You never ever download an app from a company site. You always go to the Apple Store or the Google Play site. Period. But you never leave your device unattended. There are numerous attacks we've seen where you're at a conference, or you're on vacation, a resort, you put your device down, leave it alone for like 30, 40 seconds. People will download an app onto it because that app will have a virus in it that will allow them to do all kinds of things you don't like. One of the more recent things that's out there now is what's called remote access technology malware. And this is a computer virus that literally will allow someone to get real-time information off your device, and in certain instances, take remote control of your device. Now, keep in mind, all these devices we're talking about, they access everyone you care about and your entire net worth. I mean, this is why you got to be really careful. This technology is great, but you got to be responsible about it. But if you're going to use an app, you better figure out all the settings.
Well, and
as I mentioned, there could be a lot of settings.
One of the things I learned from your team was I now have a computer that is the only place that I access financial information for us. That's not totally fair. I have our banking app on my phone that I keep operational stuff in. But our investment accounts and things of that nature, that is the only thing that computer touches. To your point of less is more. There's no apps. There's no other, functional things on that device. It is strictly for banking.
Yeah, well, you're a really high-profile target, so that's very important.
Well, I don't know about that.
Well, again, who has a large, successful business expect to get more attention. Bad guys know where to look. But the other thing to keep in mind here is how sophisticated they're becoming using artificial intelligence software. Mm-hmm. We were involved in helping a family that lost $6 million in an attack recently. And what the bad guys have figured out is they've studied cognitive psychology. And I know you're very familiar with behavioral finance, which is understanding on how the way people make decisions affects investments. Cognitive psychology looks at how the brain actually works and how it makes decisions. And what they found is that we don't take information and process it. Rather, we have a bunch of shortcuts in our brain that let us make quicker decisions. And they're hardwired in back from when we were cavemen. Because if you didn't make a quick decision, you get eaten or killed or something like that. So the reality is we take information in and we compare them with reference points. And if the information we get is consistent with those reference points, we are hardwired to believe all the information we get. So what the criminals are doing now is they are going in and they're trying to find ways to profile you. In other words, you got all these apps and you're not turning the settings on. You're just putting so much information out there. They can figure out, using AI, a pretty good accurate guess at what your reference points are. And then they can devise an attack so that it's very credible to you, even though later on when you look at it, go, how did I make this mistake? How could I have known this was happening? And in this attack, this poor person was attacked, and she's a very sophisticated person. It's not some simple older woman or older man. They're very, very smart people. What they found is that they profiled her. They posed as government officials. They convinced her she was at risk. They knew what assumptions she's had. They knew kind of how to push her buttons. And over a 3-month attack where they met with her twice, they wound up stealing $6 million. Okay. And I remember having a conversation. They came to us afterwards looking for help. We locked her down and we had to get the FBI to help her and everything. But she said to me, how could have I fallen for this? And I said, the reason is they figured out your assumptions.
Yep.
And that, keep in mind, you're hardwired to believe this. This is not something you can ignore. This is how we're designed. This is part of the basic equipment. And so if I'm, that's why you have to think of this as you can't have cybersecurity without cyber privacy. If you aren't protecting your cyber privacy, they'll find ways to get around your cybersecurity.
So can we talk a little bit more about that, right? Like what are the assumptions around cyber privacy and some of the things that our clients need to be thinking about there?
Yeah. Well, first off, you have to assume that virtually every company you deal with today is trying to find ways to collect and sell your information. Every time you go to the grocery store,
you're not wrong.
Every time, by the way, you plug into your car, your leased vehicle, you plug in your device. They even come with their little hotspots now in the cars, that kind of thing, because they get to collect your information and sell it. That's a big, big business for them. So one, you just have to assume there's a lot of people collecting your information, and you have to prevent on anything personal to you. You have to turn the settings on so you decide what information is collected and you decide who can access it. That's the most important thing you can do. But I also want to emphasize that no matter what you do, there's a lot of information out there, so don't freak out. And so what they're worried about is the day-to-day stuff as opposed to some broader stuff.
Sure.
Like I can remember you get notified, your Social Security number's online. Yeah, no kidding. Everybody says. Oh, your birthday's online. Yeah, everyone's birthday's online. Your email's online. Every email's online. Part of this is because cities, counties, and states sell them this information. This is a big, big business. They sell them to databases. But when we're talking about cyber privacy, what we're really talking about what is going on in your day-to-day life and the ability for someone, given the technology you're using, to access that. And that's why unless you're turning all these settings on and limiting which apps you use to ones you really need, you're like one of these crazy influencers who has a camera in a room telling the whole world what's going on every 5 minutes. You become a Kardashian.
But at least there, you're doing it unintentionally, right? Whereas they're doing it intentionally. Yeah.
And the reality is, someone like the Kardashians, you have no idea what's really going on in their lives. That's all set up with security, and you'd never see their real stuff. That's just programming.
Good point. So, talk to me. What is title fraud, and how do people protect themselves there? I've seen a bunch of stuff on social media about this now.
Yeah, happens about 12,000 times a year. And what will happen is someone will make a filing, typically remotely, with a county assessor's office claiming they bought a property. Now, the county assessor doesn't have the staff to go diligence all these things to see if they're legitimate. So what they do is just change the deed. And then the cyber criminal will begin to borrow money against their property, rent it out, or sell it. It really happens a lot with vacation homes because they'll wait to the end of the season. Then as soon as the season ends, time to go either sell the property, rent out, or leverage it up. And then when you come back, someone's living there. But they also are doing it to primary residences now. And the good news is it's not hard to protect yourself. What you got to do is go to the local county assessor's office, and most of them will do this, and sign up for a notification if someone makes a filing on your property. And if you get a notification, a nanosecond later, you got to be on the phone calling them. We do this for our clients, and we've had like 4 or 5 families have notifications pop up in just the last 3 weeks.
Do we do that for me?
Yes.
I'm writing a note down.
I took the information. We submitted it.
Appreciate it. Hey, you know what? I eat my own cooking. That's why you're here.
Thank you.
Talk to me about artificial intelligence and how it's changing the game for cybersecurity.
Yeah. And we kind of started the discussion about just how fast everything is moving. This is what's driving everything.
Yeah.
I teach classes, to advisory firm clients all over the U.S. and Canada. I've been doing it for 4 years now. And the class I teach a year ago is completely different than what I teach now. That's how fast things are changing.
I bet.
They just, what they're doing is with artificial intelligence, they can create ways to get around the protections you have on your accounts. In other words, we have a set of protections set up so that, let's say, I guess your password. Well, you also get a code that comes to your device. It's called multi-factor authentication. You have to put the code in as well as the password. Well, they're finding ways to intercept that code. They're either going into your telecom account and diverting cell signals, or they're, as I said, have certain types of computer viruses, which are all AI generated, that will go in and capture the code. We're seeing them, as I said, profile people, so they really understand a lot. And again, they do this in an automated fashion. It's not like somebody has to spend months and hours, trying to figure out how to do this. I'll give you a recent example that shows how smooth these guys are. They recognize that if you're ever going to take money out of a custodial account, you typically have to notify the advisor. You got to notify the client. There's usually a verbal confirmation. There's other things that have to do this. Well, an attack that we were asked to help out on, a person got a text message from what appeared to be from the custodian. It looked like all the other ones they had a link. She clicked on it. She had not taken the steps in terms of protecting her settings, so all her passwords were sitting there. And by clicking on the link, she got in one of these remote access technology computer viruses. And so they went into her browser. They stole 19 passwords that we found later. And one of those was one for her custodial account. And with the remote access technology, they could get the multi-factor code, the second code that's sent out when you go into the account. But before they went into the account, they went offshore and they bought up a bunch of penny stocks. Now, anyone who saw The Wolf of Wall Street will know that these are the stocks they talked about, not in a favorable way, but they don't trade. They're not very liquid. So if you buy, say, $10,000, you triple the price of the shares. In other words, it's not like something you can, it trades very easily. And so they went offshore and bought up a bunch of these penny stocks. They then got into her account, intercepted the multi-factor code, and using every dollar they could find in her account and all the trusts linked to it, bought up the same penny stocks. And then the second after they'd done that, because that really pushed up the price of the stocks, they dumped theirs in the offshore account. And so at the point where the advisor and the client was receiving the confirmation, they were gone. The money was gone. They found a way by manipulating asset values to get around all the protections that were in place. This happened a few months ago. We're in a new world now. Okay, this is not. You have to understand that you got to act either responsibly or get ready. Something's coming your way.
Yeah. I hadn't heard that one. I've heard you present a few times. That one's going to keep me up at night a little bit now.
Oh yeah. No. And I have 60 of these, 70, 80. Again, we've never had a client get breached, lose money, but every day someone shows up and we have 3 people that are very good at helping them. We never turn anyone away just because that's our values, our culture. We'll help them even if they're not a client. But it's like, okay, explain what happened. And they'll say, well, we're not sure, but it looks like they did this to this, to that, to this. And they got to hear, wow, uh-oh. Yeah. Like, for example, we now, when all of our clients are putting pins on their cell phone accounts, because we've seen of the last 60 so attacks, 40 of them, they went and diverted the cell phone. And they were either posing as the client on a cell phone, like in a fake kidnapping,
yep,
or they're using that to get codes or to initiate wires, and the advisor thinks they're talking to the client. They're not talking to the client. Okay, this is the world we're in now. And so you have to sort of think about it as if there's a way to get to me, they're going to try to figure out how to do it. So I just have to make it very difficult for them. And if you do that, very hard to steal money. If you're very wealthy and you're a very high profile target, then you consider doing things like we've talked about, having like a dedicated device that's the only way you access your accounts.
Got it.
But you're having to trade off balance between convenience and security. And the only way to limit all your risk, go offline. Everything else is a trade-off between convenience and security.
Tying it back, what should people really be thinking specifically about to protect themselves in the short term here?
All right. There's two things everybody has to do. First thing is education and more education. Second thing is they got to get to basic cyber hygiene.
Yeah.
And we've touched on what those things are. If you're going to have an online account, it's got to have a lengthy, unique, randomly generated, sophisticated password, period.
Yep.
You're going to use a device. You got to use it properly. You can use an app. You've got to use it properly. And if you're ever going to use public networks, you got to find a way to protect yourself by encrypting your online traffic. You can get a piece of software. It's called a VPN. It's not expensive. And you turn it on when you're online on public, like using public Wi-Fi. You don't want to have it on when you're not on public Wi-Fi because it makes it really hard to connect to certain accounts. But you turn it on and nobody can look inside your device. If you do those basics, that's what's called basic cyber hygiene. And if everybody did this, nobody knows the math of this, but a friend of mine who was a senior person at Defense once told me that he thought that 96, 97% of all cybercrime would go away tomorrow if everybody did this.
Really? All right.
It's that robust. The good news is 99% of people do nothing.
Yeah. Well,
so if you want to make yourself the ugliest bell at the ball for cyber criminals, this is the best way to do it.
But that's, I want to emphasize that point, right? Like, I didn't have the awareness I do until I needed to have the awareness that I do. And unfortunately, it was after something had happened. And the frequent reminder that Mark used to send to me is, are you going to wait to sign up until after something happens, or are you going to sign up proactively?
Yeah, before or after. Before or after.
I think that was actually the message you would send to me. Before or after, question mark.
Yeah. I say converts are the strongest believers. I just hope you get converted before a bad thing happens.
Yeah.
That's right.
Mark, really appreciate the time.
Thank you very much.
And I'm sure more to come, but really appreciate the time this morning. The previous presentation by Bogart Wealth was intended for general information purposes only. No portion of the presentation serves as the receipt of or as a substitute for personalized investment advice from Bogart Wealth or any other investment professional of your choosing. Different types of investments involve varying degrees of risk, and it should not be assumed that future performance of any specific investment or investment strategy or any other non-investment related or planning services, discussion, or content will be profitable, be suitable for your portfolio or individual situation, or prove successful. Neither Bogart Wealth's investment advisor registration status nor any amount of prior experience or success should be construed that a certain level of results or satisfaction will be achieved if Bogart Wealth is engaged or continues to be engaged to provide investment advisory services. Bogart Wealth is neither a law firm nor accounting firm, and no portion of its services shall be construed as legal or accounting advice. No portion of the podcast content should be construed by a client or prospective client as a guarantee that he or she will experience a certain level of results if Bogart Wealth is engaged or continues to be engaged to provide investment advisory services. Copies of Bogart Wealth's current written disclosure brochure and Form CRS discussing our advisory services and fees are available upon request or at www.bogartwealth.com.